Take control over your bagpipe soundtrack. We all have a soundtrack going on in our heads. And when it comes to learning a new instrument like the bagpipes, there's going to be a soundtrack there whether you know it or whether you don't. What's an example of a soundtrack? It might be the bagpipes are the toughest instrument to learn, or it might be I don't have a musical bone in my body, or it might be I'm too old to learn the bagpipes, or it might be, a number of things. But the bottom line is you can choose what soundtrack you have rolling around in your head when you're learning the pipes. And if if just some of these soundtracks I've mentioned, some of these things rolling around in your head in the back of your thoughts, if they sound familiar, if you think this is something you've struggled with, just put a comment below and just say yes, or just let me know what soundtrack you're struggling with. Because I'll be certain if there's one out there that you're struggling with, odds are someone else is struggling with that same soundtrack. And I like the word soundtrack because, soundtrack just sets the mood so much. We can have a lovely scene, a calm room. We're sitting down to practice. We have our chanter, we have our music. Everything sounds wonderful. If a nice tune is going on, we imagine a nice song with that. It looks like a perfect little scene. But we could have the same scene alone in a room, nothing but the sheet music, the chanter, and a horrible soundtrack, like maybe a spooky monster soundtrack going on, and it can feel like a nightmare. So, like a soundtrack, that music, that voice in our head can just set the scene so much to how we approach learning the bagpipes. And I know for me growing up, my soundtrack was I could only, people would only like my playing if I could play as fast as my brother. My brother was a bit older than me, a little bit more experienced. He was a very great player. I was always quite humble and like humble, right? Because not humiliated, but just humility. That's the word I'm looking for. So I'm very humble because my brother was always such a great player, and people would say, "Oh, you're so good at the pipes, Alec," and I'd say, "Yeah, not really." Because why? Because my soundtrack is I can't play fast like my brother, And when I'm playing for performances, whether my brother was also playing or not, it would again be, oh, people aren't going to enjoy this song unless I can play it quicker. So what ended up happening was, I wouldn't enjoy the performance. I wouldn't take in those good compliments after the performance because I was like, oh, I should have been able to play faster. And lots of times I would try to play too fast that I would actually make more mistakes or mess up my tempo or my rhythm, And I still remember this one time. It was in high school. It was a talent show. My brother had played, and I followed up after him and played, and I played a kind of a medley of tunes, and I had some real fast ones in there because I wanted to try to play fast so people enjoy it. But just as a time filler, I also had in a slower stress bay, just so I could be up there playing long enough for this talent show. And the stress bay, I was like, oh, whatever, people aren't going to enjoy that. It's just a time filler, and then I can get to the songs that I could play as fast as I could. But the thing was, after the talent show, a few people, in particular some older high school students, came up to me and they really complimented me on the slow song I played. That seemed to be everyone's favorite, was the slower stress bay. And it really challenged that soundtrack in my head that I had to play fast for people to notice me and appreciate my music. And I had to play as fast as my brother to prove I was any good. But it turned out that was a complete, make-believe thing in my own head, and it was taking the joy out of me learning the bagpipes and performing. It turned out people actually liked the slower songs. So that's a story of my soundtrack and how these soundtracks can be going on sometimes for, weeks, months, even years, and we don't really challenge them. So if you have a soundtrack going on similarly, and if you're not sure, just sit down for a moment, take out a piece of paper, think about what do I think of my ability to play the pipes? What do I think gets in the way of me playing the pipes? What do other people think of me when I tell them I'm learning the pipes? Those are just some questions where you can dig into that soundtrack of yours, and and try to choose a different soundtrack. For me, I chose a different soundtrack. My soundtrack was I just need to enjoy my music for people to appreciate it. I don't have to play fast for people to enjoy my music. I just have to enjoy my music. And that became my new soundtrack. And I encourage you, you can have a new soundtrack. It might be, I'm better at learning the pipes now that I'm older, because now that I'm older, I'm more focused, I'm more disciplined. I'm not scatterbrained and trying to rebel against my parents, like I did learning piano lessons when I was growing up or whatever, right? You might be more disciplined, and it's now an advantage that you're older learning the pipes. Or, the pipes being the toughest instrument. I made a whole YouTube video kind of kiboshing that, trying to come up with a different soundtrack. Whereas pipes are actually one of the easier instruments. There's only 9 notes. There's no up and down octaves, so the point is we can change that soundtrack. You can choose a new soundtrack. And if you have a new soundtrack, you're going to have more fun learning. You're going to learn faster. And you're going to, it's about enjoying the process. So I hope that helps. Again, if you've had these challenges with soundtracks in your own bagpipe learning journey, post in the comments below. Just say a big yes, or if you're willing, share a little bit about your soundtrack, one you struggled with, or maybe a new one you've adopted, and what kind of difference that's made for you. I'm excited. I'm watching the comments below, and thanks so much for tuning in. Happy piping.